Welcome to the Crypto Traders Podcast, simplifying cryptocurrency for traders and investors around the world. Subscribe for interviews with developers, market updates, and a professional look at the future of money. You've come to trust Matthew and Kurt to filter out the noise across social media. Now you can listen on the go. Without further ado, here's the Crypto Traders Podcast.
All right, what's up, everybody? It's TK Coleman and Steve Patterson and Kurt Wuckert Jr. And we're here to just talk about BSV. So to give you a little context for this discussion, we were initially going to have just a BCH versus BSV debate. But then over the course of the last few weeks, I feel like Steve Patterson's stance on BSV has softened a little bit. His stance on BCH just kind of, weakened a little bit. And I'll let you speak for yourself here pretty soon. But I decided to switch the format up and just make it all about the best arguments that can be made against BSV, because there are some things I know that you like about it, Steve. You're very sympathetic towards it. You believe that it could win, but you also believe there are some very significant concerns. And so I really like Kurt's performance on the HOTEP debate. I've had some subsequent conversations with Kurt and thought he was a pretty good spokesperson for it. So we're just gonna talk about best arguments against BSV. And Kurt, for the most part, you're gonna be the man in the hot seat. I'll facilitate and try to help out a little bit, but you're in the hot seat, man. And Steve's gonna go at you. You ready for that?
Sounds good to me. I got a good position here.
I was muted there. Yes, yeah, I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it.
So let's start with this, just some statement of what your position actually is. So Kurt, I'd just like a brief intro statement from you on what is your position on BSV and why do you feel that way? And then Steve, I like to kind of do a temperature check on where you are with BSV, and then maybe we can start with some concern.
Yeah. Sure. Well, full disclosure, I do a little bit of freelance work with CoinGeek.com, so I'm not entirely unbiased from a financial standpoint for anybody that wants to audit such things. But I've written less than 10 articles that have been published by CoinGeek.com, and that's like the whole relationship there outside of personal.
But your embracing BSV was prior to doing that.
Quite a bit, yeah. Right. Yeah, so I've been a big blocker as long as I can remember the debate. So the first time I recall it was probably 2015. I was super supportive of the Bitcoin Unlimited thing and Bitcoin Classic and XT and that whole side of things. And I thought it was just a pretty obvious way to go. And turns out that was a minority position. I was a big Bitcoin casher. I hosted the Chicago Bitcoin Cash meetup for basically the whole time that BCH was a united community. I worked quite a bit with Bitcoin.com at the time. It was a Bitcoin.com sponsored meetup. And then when the BSV thing started to happen, I was actually not a big fan of Craig Wright initially. But I did agree with the roadmap. And so for me, it was a little bit like, oh, plug my nose and swallow. Like I was a big fan of Roger. Roger was kind of the reason I got into Bitcoin at all. Like when I was first curious, I discovered some Roger videos and was like, wow, this Roger Ver guy is super passionate. So for me to kind of exodus from that whole community was a pretty big step for me. But I believe in Bitcoin, and I believed that BSV was correct in the split in most regards. And I feel more and more vindicated as time goes on, but it was not an easy journey.
Steve?
Yeah, so my position has been a long time big blocker as well since the beginning. And then a big Bitcoin casher after the failure of SegWit 2x. I thought that was a big blunder on the part of miners and businesses to back out at the last minute from social media pressure. And then became a big Bitcoin casher. And then with the BCH, the BSV split, I was kind of ambivalent. I see good arguments on both sides. I saw them back then, and I still see them now. And so I just kind of, I didn't have super strong opinions either way, though from what I could tell, BCH had more network effect behind it than BSV. Craig Wright is definitely an enigma in a lot of ways. And I think in my position right now, I still think he's a liability or one of the biggest liabilities for BSV. So I saw Rogers on BCH, and the miners went with BCH and had majority hash rate. It won the hash war. I like how BSV framed that split. They said this is a hash war. And some people in BCH were like, no, that's not true. But that is actually very much true. BSV lost it. At least at the beginning, BSV lost the hash war. So I was with the miners, and miner majority hash rate was on BCH. So I said, well, that's where my chips are going to lie. I also like in BCH, they're more open to like new privacy features, which I think is valuable from a currency perspective and from a political perspective. So I've been a little bit more biased towards BCH since the split. Although I just bought, I only bought more of both coins. It's not like I sold either. Since I'm a big block Bitcoiner, you choose among two right now. Maybe three in the future, we'll see. But the last month or so, maybe 2 months, a lot has happened. Specifically in BCH, we had this funding proposal put forward by miners that I wasn't a huge fan of. I didn't think it was going to be a deal breaker, but the way it was implemented was horrendous, from my opinion. It was essentially the lead dev of Bitcoin ABC said, I'm going to suggest these 3 lists of addresses that I and my friends control, and then I get a 5% cut of the block reward indefinitely. I thought it was done terribly, which made me lose faith. And then, well, we could talk about that in more detail if you like, but that was not a good sign on the BCH side. That we're right now in BCH discussing a possible split is a really objectively terrible sign. And then on BSV, and part of my criticisms for a long time is, where are the businesses? Like, I see no signs of legitimate businesses that are using Bitcoin SV in any way. And then after the CoinGeek conference in London just recently, they had a lecture or a presentation I was very impressed by a healthcare provider who's going to experiment putting healthcare data to the blockchain. It's like $1 billion company. And they're working with InChain to do that. I thought, okay, well, that is, to me, that's a sign that it's exiting the hobbyist phase and starting to enter the big business phase, which I consider, I put a lot of weight behind that. I wish BCH had something like that we could promote, but we don't yet. So yeah, so right now, just in the past, month, I think BSV is more likely to win at this point. But yeah, I still have lots of objections that I'm happy to bring up in the course of this conversation.
Yeah, man. Well, I think this is the time to go ahead and dive in. So let's start with one at a time, and I'll move us along. Just to maintain a little structure, but let's dive in.
So one of the biggest issues I have consistently is the rhetoric behind BSV. I like honest rhetoric. And when they are talking about it's a lockdown protocol, I remember at the very beginning of the BSV split, I was talking with Ryan Charles, and I look up to Ryan Charles. I think he's really an excellent mind, and I think he deserves a lot of respect. And I remember him saying, okay, we're done with the hard forks. It's over. This is ridiculous. We don't need them. Bitcoin is good enough. No more hard forks. And then there was another hard fork in BSV. So the claim was the protocol is locked down, but it's concretely not locked down. And then there was a little sleight of hand, and they said, well, the economic protocol is locked down. Okay, well, that's a bit playing a little bit fast and loose. And that's disingenuous to imply that the technical stuff is locked down. Even right now, it's not locked down. There's still a looming, at least one looming hard fork in the future that the proposal is specifically to change the difficulty adjustment algorithm back to the original one, which, without going into too much technical detail, is potentially a system breaker. Like, this is to have two old DAAs at the same time is unprecedented and could slow the network down to a halt. So that would be the first point of contention, is to say, it's nice to claim that the protocol is locked down, but it's just not.
That's first of all, it's a totally valid point, but I think a lot of people look at it specifically on the technical roadmap. Like, yes, there was the Quasar hard fork protocol upgrade, then there was the Genesis hard fork protocol upgrade, and then there is the someday Chronicle upgrade, right? All of them being software hard forks from a pure open source software standpoint. The implementation will hard fork, and anybody that does not follow those rules will be forked off the network, et cetera, et cetera. And this is generally how it's discussed in Bitcoin. It's how it's been discussed for a decade in Bitcoin and quite a bit longer in open source software in general. So I understand that, but what's being discussed, or what has been discussed, is that Bitcoin fundamentally means a very specific thing. So I won't speak for Ryan Charles, because I don't know what he said or in what context that he spoke. However, Ryan tends to be careful with his words as well. So, I give him all due credit. But the way that I've understood it from day one is that Bitcoin means a very specific thing. It's a specific thing with a specific definition. And if somebody changes Bitcoin, it ceases to be Bitcoin. And it doesn't matter if 99 out of 100 people want to call this thing Bitcoin that is not Bitcoin, that ultimately there's this thing out there, whether it's achievable or not, that is Bitcoin. And I always make a religious analogy here. So if you take the Abrahamic religions, right? Like, let's just say Muslims, Jews, and mainstream Christianity. We all agree essentially on most books of the Bible. So we'll agree on Genesis as the creation story, for example. But we start to diverge as we make our way through the Old Testament. And like, well, no, this was the good guy and this was the bad guy. And then you get to the New Testament and it gets worse and worse and worse, right? We keep disagreeing on more and more things as time goes on chronologically. And there's not really anybody there that can answer that question, right? Like, what is the valid view on man's relationship to God, assuming one of them is right at all, right? But if we look and say, okay, who can be the judge? Who can be the arbiter? And people would say, well, the church or the priests or whatever. But when it really comes down to it, the answer is, well, truth. Truth defines truth. Well, okay, who defines truth? Well, God, I guess. But then it becomes a much more ethereal conversation, right? But you break it down and say, okay, so who is the valid Abrahamic religion? And if perhaps there are no practitioners, maybe there aren't any valid practitioners of an Abrahamic religion, again, assuming that there is an absolute truth, maybe all people who consider themselves Jews, Muslims, and Christians are practicing it wrong. They are not practicing a faith which worships the creator God. So bringing that back to Bitcoin, we would say that Bitcoin is set in stone. Bitcoin means a very specific thing. And maybe that is defined by the software, or maybe it's defined by the rule set, or maybe it's defined by some other thing, but we need to figure out what that thing is. So all of these derivations away from what Bitcoin was created to be are the part that needs to be trimmed back. So we are coming back to, or we're proselytizing, or maybe looking to the ether, to use a vaguely religious and crypto term, to figure out exactly how to get back to that set in stone. So Bitcoin is over here set in stone and nobody's using it right now, including BSV. We're not there yet, but we're working our way back to Bitcoin.
Okay, a few points on that. So does this work for any other cryptocurrency? Like, to say, what is Bitcoin Cash? I don't think anybody would say, well, it's this thing that doesn't exist. It is a theoretical ideal and we're working towards it. I think what people mean is, no, it's BCH asset, the less ethereal thing. Yeah.
I would agree. I would agree that Litecoin is more so defined by, whatever rules that Litecoin has set out, or Dogecoin or Vertcoin or whatever. I think those things, but I think they also have much looser definitions. It's the same thing as defining, like, well, what's a Mormon? That's actually a much easier conversation than what is a Christian, right? So you've got.
Okay, but so where does one get the knowledge to say what is Bitcoin when it's not the BTC token, or it's not the thing that most people think they're talking about when they're talking about Bitcoin?
I mean, that's the debate. That's why we have so many competing factions, is because it's unclear. It's the same reason why we have so many denominations of Abrahamic faiths.
Yeah, I just don't find that particularly compelling. I think it makes more sense to say, like, there was this guy that released this white paper. It's a brilliant functioning system. Bitcoin, I think you can understand Bitcoin as an idea that can be generally grasped, though people will have different perspectives on it. Mm-hmm. But to say we're not going to hard fork away from the ideal that none of us know what it is, just seems kind of, it definitely, actually, I like the religious analogy. It seems very religious to me, but not in a good way. It seems kind of fuzzy. So if the criticism is, hey, the protocol is not locked down in stone, even though people say it is, and the response is, no, it is, but we don't really know we don't really know what Bitcoin is, but it's not changing. That doesn't persuade me.
It's not that we don't know what Bitcoin is. It's that it's very, very clearly debatable, and it's so debatable that there's hundreds of definitions. In fact, I would argue that most altcoins are more Bitcoin than not, right? I mean, if you look at the code base of nearly everything out there, they're very much clone stamps of Bitcoin by and large, to the point where most of them even just follow the roadmaps of Bitcoin Core and just merge in whatever they need to into their own repos. So we're not saying that Bitcoin is not achievable or that it can't be known. I'm saying that it can be. It's possible that it can't be. And I think that's what everybody needs to realize. What religious people are really bad at is saying it's possible that all of us are wrong. Like, there might not be a single person on earth with an actual relationship with God, just like there may not be a single person on earth who's quote unquote right about Bitcoin. Fortunately, there are living people who participated in Bitcoin at the very beginning, and we can argue whether or not Craig is Satoshi, which in my opinion, a messiah of sorts could be the person to make such a definition if they were indeed the valid messiah.
Let me chime in here. Let me chime in here for a minute. To stick with the religious analogy, in some ways, Bitcoin SV is similar to Eastern Orthodoxy, in that Eastern Orthodoxy makes this claim to be the faith as originally understood and practiced, right? We have like unbroken apostolic succession. We practice the liturgy as it was practiced in the early church. And I think what makes the debate interesting here is that Bitcoin SV isn't saying that, hey, we're running Bitcoin in a particular way. It's saying this is Satoshi's vision. Okay. Yeah. This is the implementation of Bitcoin as it was understood by Satoshi when Satoshi wrote the white paper. And I think in order to move it forward, we need to know what is that understanding. Because I think Steve's position right now is, hey, define it however you want to define it so that we can figure out if BSV is being consistent with the claim to lock down the protocol. What is the essence of Bitcoin, and what is the nature of this protocol that cannot be changed?
I think, yes, if you break down the Eastern Orthodox analogy, what does it really, really come down to? Well, it comes down to a very fundamental view of Scripture. Just like with Bitcoin, it's like, okay, let's strip away all the politics. Let's strip away all the, who did what, whose fault is it? Where is Bitcoin defined? The answer is very clearly the white paper. I don't think anybody can make a fundamental argument about defining Bitcoin without anchoring something to the white paper at the very least, unless, in my opinion, it becomes invalid at that point.
I think that's fair, but there's not really code in the white paper. Like, when people are talking about the protocol implementation of Bitcoin, BSV's pitch seems to be the code has to stop changing so that businesses can build on it and they don't have to worry about the actual code that they build on top of it breaking. I love that marketing pitch. I'm just saying that's not true because the code is changing.
Sure, but see, you bring up a really good point here, that what's actually changing is we're moving back to that fundamental thing. So like we discussed,
but the code wasn't fundamental. The code was in the white paper. And I agree. I mean, I'm sorry, the original thing you're laying out
Right.
is the big picture ideas of Bitcoin that are laid out in the white paper. I totally agree. I think it's valid. Sure. And I think you could make a compelling case that BSV is actually a closer implementation of Satoshi's vision, like the abstract. I totally buy that argument, and I find it persuasive. But that's not really what people are claiming is locked down. Like all of the drama with the BTC takeover of Bitcoin, yeah, there was an intellectual a component to that, but they're also talking about code changes. Like there's the compelling pitch is to say, let's stop changing the code and giving the power to these rogue devs to change the code, right?
Sure. So you establish that culturally. You know, it's just like, you know, why does San Francisco have such a different culture than New York? And there's a million reasons for that. But one of them is like a New Yorker decides to be a New Yorker. And that, you know, that's a pretty vague thing, but it ends up being like, I can tell a New Yorker from a San Franciscan. So it's the exact same thing. If you say that BSV is set in stone, we are locking the protocol, we're not doing these things, it forces the people that are participating in the network to say, okay, if we need to make a change, how do we make this change unegregious? Or, you know, like how do we not break XYZ thing, making our way to ultimately, the thing is that the real goal is to have the software, the implementation set in stone. That is the actual goal.
Right.
To get there.
Oh, I think we're losing TK.
Looks like he froze.
Uh-oh. So he's probably, I think he's recording. So I think it's probably going to be choppy on his recording as well.
Yep.
So we should definitely wait.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right. So Kurt, you were addressing, I think you were addressing the idea of the protocol being locked down in terms of culture. Yeah.
Ultimately, so when the culture is that we're setting it in stone, when fundamentally that as a people, the BSV people will function in such a way that the code doesn't break all kinds of other things, and any change that, you know, has to be made, even in an emergency, needs to take into consideration, hey, we're not going to just arbitrarily add opcodes or remove opcodes or change the way that Bitcoin deals with script. Like we're not going to break whole stacks of people's business models because, hey, we have this interesting idea that we want to try. So ultimately the goal is for BSV to, from a software standpoint, to be done, to be set in stone to the point where anything else that occurs within that set of software that's built on top of a protocol that doesn't change. But that's a journey. We're on that journey.
I think that's very desirable. And I agree culture matters. And I agree to have a culture where you don't frivolously change things is important. However, do you grant that there is a very important conceptual distinction between saying we are in the process of setting it in stone and saying it is set in stone?
That's such a bad pitch, though.
Hey, I don't disagree. I'm just trying to get at the truth here. So this actually, it's funny because we were talking about this in the last Big Block Bitcoin discussion we had with TK and Isaac and Derek. It seems to me that by lying, as some people are, in my opinion, it is a way to actually set the culture that one wishes to see. So I get that. Like I get that. I just, can we admit, okay, now we're being real. It's not set in stone.
Yes, but when Patrick Henry said, give me liberty or give me death, did he get full liberty or did he get death?
Oh, so it's important. So I grant that rhetoric is important and culture is important, these type of things. But when somebody's really trying to get down to the nuts and bolts and they hear, you know, the average person hears, oh, wow, this protocol is set in stone. It bothers me to know that this is bullshit. And I think it's very persuasive to say, hey, look, we are in the process of setting it in stone. We have the professional culture and the ethos that we don't just have random people changing and breaking things because they think, oh, there's too much decentralization. Now we have to break a bunch of people's businesses. I can speak about that honestly. I personally don't like that it's lying.
Steve, I want to clarify the objection here. Are you saying that you're okay with BSV saying we're doing all of these things to get to the point where the protocol is locked down.
Well, that would be true.
But you feel like that's being dishonest because the rhetoric has been, it's already locked down. We've already delivered on this promise.
I very much have that objection. And let me give you one concrete example, software-wise. So remember, the rhetoric of protocol lockdown has been there since the beginning, since literally the beginning of the BSV existence. One of the recent changes in Genesis upgrade is to fundamentally disallow multi-sig transactions and how they've been done for I don't know how many years, since I remember multi-sig was added. So it was funny because I was aware this was happening at the conceptual level when they were doing the Genesis upgrade. And then I happened to be moving around some old coins and I ran into this problem. I accidentally split coins from BCH and BSV that I didn't want split. It was a pain in the butt to get it fixed. So already, not only has there been meaningful feature breaking protocol changes, it's personally affected me, right?
Well, so thus illustrating why we don't want to mess with the protocol. But so P2SH, what you're talking about, pay to script hash, I imagine. Yeah. So, and that's actually a really good example because pay to script hash, I want to say it's a 2012 or 2013.
Something like that, yeah.
Soft fork. It was a Gavin and Drayson, like, hey, we can do this. Boom, soft fork. Problem is it screwed up a bunch of other things. It made a bunch of redundancy in the scripting language that then also had to be dealt with. And the way they dealt with it was, well, let's just shut those things off. And it's like, that's how a mechanic would function at a car dealership. Like, well, this is rattling. Hopefully he doesn't notice what I broke by fixing the thing that's rattling, right? And that's actually a valid way to treat a Honda Civic, right? Like, especially like, it's near the end of its life, or maybe this thing doesn't matter, or it doesn't matter to that person.
Yeah.
But again, we're getting back to the fundamentals of, would you do that to a Bentley? Like, would you do that to a high functioning Ferrari? Like, no, we're gonna actually restore this thing correctly.
So is the claim that there's something about P2SH which would actually present an objective problem were that feature to remain in with the Genesis upgrade? Like it's taped to something, like the engine is taped to the thing, but you had to rip it off and it would break this other thing if you didn't fix it.
I'm not a software engineer, so for me to have a high level version of that conversation would be unfair. But my understanding of it is that essentially P2SH screwed with the way that UTXOs were managed in such a way that it disallowed multi-sig working the way that it worked prior to P2SH working. And that's...
So in order to get the old multi-sig, you must appreciate P2SH.
Correct.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know enough either to say, but that would be a very important claim. If that's true, then that would justify that kind of change, in my opinion.
Yeah. And again, I can't audit that conversation, but that was what I was explained, that there's various other ways to do multi-sig that were not explored before P2SH was, slapped on. And
So from a truth perspective, not from a strategy perspective, from a truth perspective, you would say it's not set in stone. But we're in the process of setting it in stone, and the part of the process of setting it in stone is setting the culture that it is set in stone. So we're just going to tell everybody, look, it's already set in stone.
I think so. First of all, saying we, like that we are going to tell everybody is unfair. Like if I'm going to have a conversation with, somebody that is going to be developing. So let's say, hey, I want to create an app. Who should I talk to if I have questions about the protocol? Well, if those two people had that conversation and said, okay, do I ever have to worry about the software hard forking? The honest conversation is, well, yes, because X, Y, and Z. However, like I said, it's a terrible pitch, and I wouldn't put it on the brochure. Like, we're set in stone, asterisk, fine print. Like that's not ideal. But for the typical person, like, hey, I want to use Handcash, or I want to use Twetch, or I want to do whatever, they don't need to know all the granular. What they need to know is that BSV is going to work in the same way from an experiential standpoint until it is completely locked down. And anybody that's not doing a business function or a software function doesn't need to worry about it at all, because culturally, this is what we're establishing. We have planted our flag very firmly right here, and we are sticking to it.
So I love that, but I don't think it's true. And let me give you another example. The coming DAA change. So just to give conceptual framework for people listening, the difficulty adjustment algorithm is the time in which it takes the difficulty of mining a block to adjust. So on average, it happens every 2 weeks. It's something like 1,000 blocks, I think, something like that. And then if it's the case that generally the difficulty has been adjusting up, which means you have to put more computer hash rate into the network to produce a block, and that's how the normal functioning of the system. Well, things get a little wonky when you have multiple coins that are using the same proof of work function, because if there are significant price fluctuations between the two, and hash rate can follow those price fluctuations, now you can have, for example, if there's a 50% drop in the price rate of BTC, it might take 50% longer to produce those blocks because the hash rate moves to a different chain. So we actually saw this already cause problems with the BCH split way back in the day. When the price of BCH spiked, a bunch of BTC miners moved to BCH, and that meant the blocks took forever to propagate. And then people were trying to cash out of their BTC and they couldn't. So the mempool backed up and made fees extremely high, which caused everybody to panic. And it was a wreck, and payments couldn't really go through. It was a nasty situation. So the way that they fixed that problem is by tweaking the difficulty adjustment algorithm on BCH to make it fluctuate less. Well, which has worked. We had some, it has worked well enough to get the job done. Yeah, it's not ideal, but it has worked. Yeah. Okay, so the BSV people say they want to go back to the old difficulty adjustment algorithm that is less flexible, while BTC is still around and the dominant coin. So we could see another nasty fluctuation in hash rate, probably more likely to affect BTC than BSV, but still, it's no longer a guarantee of any kind of normal functioning stability of the network. You can't actually bet on there being an average 10-minute blocks on BSV as you could on BCH once you change the difficulty adjustment algorithm, right?
This is true. So, again, we're on a journey, and it's just like, I've made a couple of analogies to religion and to sort of the founding of the United States, because I think there are some good analogies there too. But it's like, again, establishing like we are a free nation, asterisk, right? And it's like it's a really difficult conversation to have. Well, are we free? Is there a spectrum of free? And that's a whole other conversation. But ultimately, there are wars to fight, and it was like we couldn't have predicted. Well, some people could have, but World War I into World War II into the Cold War, and then how that changed the culture and what it means to be free and all of those kind of things. And Bitcoin has a very similar journey. We are unfortunately in a civil war for domination of the SHA-256 hashing algorithm, and somebody's got to be absorbed. They can't just work in tandem forever. It's just not going to work. It makes all of them less secure. And it comes down to the fact that the way that Bitcoin is designed is that it really should be one single network. And, maybe even the BTC UTXO set could be moved over onto BSV. And if you want to have tokenized BTC on BSV, that's something that could be done. But ultimately, there's got to be that absorption. Like, the biggest network needs the most hash power for the most security. And that's unfortunately a big question mark that is in everybody's camp equally, as far as I'm concerned. So
when you say they have to be, one has to win, why would that be the case? I mean, we've had this, a kind of successful parasitism of BSV and BCH on the majority blockchain, on the majority hash rate. It's like 5%. I don't know, between the two of them. I don't know what it is right now, 5-10%.
Something, it's less than 10, but yeah. I don't know the number exactly either. Partially, it's the halvening. It becomes less and less profitable to mine for the block reward, which means somebody has to replace their block reward with fees in a permanent sense, in a way where the chain is still usable, that encourages people to use the chain, or they die. Like it's a ticking time bomb, and it's built that way. So at some point, one or basically one lives or they all die, as far as I'm concerned.
But I mean, so that's not the case if there's price appreciation. So if the price continues to go up because people find utility in the chain, let's say BTC somehow does something which is valuable and people justifiably put money there, which I don't think will happen, but let's say it does, you could still have an increase in the amount of hash rate on all chains if there's the price appreciation.
I think it's possible. Like with Bitcoin, we're living in a period of subsidy, and it's just like saying, it's like talking about social health care or something. Like, well, this works, and it's like, well, it works for a generation or two before there's a massive monetary reset or something. And it's one of those things that we don't know. Like, so both of us are very clearly speculating on what's possible. But what we've seen today, we're functioning on like 95% plus of miner revenue is block reward. So, to argue like, oh no, that 5% is going to do something in the next, 20 years, it's difficult. There's not really a good precedent to call to, in my opinion.
Well, that's true. And I think if you're talking timelines of 20 years, then it definitely seems like you would have convergence around one chain when you're talking about the specific hash function. Like that does make sense, but I don't think there's any kind of conceptual necessity that's the case. I mean, we can have parasites probably that hang around quite a while, and the dominant chain could even flip from being BTC to being BSV, but it might not actually kill BTC. I mean, they might add some little difficulty adjustment thing that keeps them around for a long time as well. It's possible.
Sure. Well,
but given the speculative nature of the market, we can say that for pretty much any altcoin, right? We can say that technically it is conceivable that name your altcoin, it could exist 10 years from now and still be alive because someone is playing the gambling game.
Sure.
Is that not a possibility?
No, I think even in 100 years, we could still have, 10 chains, 20 chains, 1,000 chains, but I think 90+% of everything will be done on one. I think actually you guys mentioned pirate radio on your last, or one of you guys did, or I heard it recently. Somebody said pirate radio is something that you can't all the way kill because some guy can just be in international waters on a ship and broadcasting. And, that's how we can look at something like Monero, for example. Be like, yeah, it does fill this little niche and people do use it, but it's nothing compared to FM radio or whatever.
Like there's a DVD rental store somewhere.
Right. Exactly.
So, Kurt, would you agree that this is a correct statement? If there is a change to the difficulty adjustment algorithm where it returns to the original formula and is in competition with BTC, we are entering uncharted territory, which could be system breaking for BSV and or BTC. That would not affect BCH.
Perhaps. I actually hadn't considered.
He'd be okay with that statement until he threw BCH in there.
It's funny. I think so little of BCH in the last 15 months or so that I kind of don't even consider where it will be. Like based on everything that I've seen from a metric standpoint on BCH, I don't see it as competing for much of anything. But yeah, I guess in some grandiose battle where BSV and BTC kill each other, BCH ends up being the Goldilocks in that situation. And
but so we are then either, it's one of two scenarios, and if you agree with that framing, it's either the case we're entering uncharted territory where the systems could break, or the claims that we're going back to the original Bitcoin thing, that's not true because the difficulty adjustment algorithm won't change because people are scared of changing it. And then I guess that's one of the two options, right?
Well, I mean, BTC, the way that I see BTC is that it's coming up against a time bomb that it has no way to diffuse. So when that happens, there must be a fundamental shift in the market, unless there's a fundamental shift in the software or something, in which case we're still talking about major lack of precedent. So I think that civil war has to happen. Like they're going to fight at some point. It's like looking at the United States and Russia for the last few hundred years. It's like, well, they're going to butt heads over resources or politics,
but not
or something.
on this DAA. I mean, if BSV doesn't change the DAA, then the difficulties facing BTC will remain something they have to deal with. It won't affect BSV.
Well, the problem is that the current difficulty adjustment on BSV is really unideal for a lot of reasons, and you see it being gamed on both BCH and BSV quite a bit. Like you see this massive sawtooth pattern where all of a sudden there's 20-second block, then a 40-second block, and then a 20-minute block, and it's miners trying to game the algorithm, and it's bad for a couple of reasons. The longer tail difficulty adjustment is so much more valuable because a miner can decide to push a bunch of transactions through without screwing up the whole difficulty adjustment of the whole network in times of, let's say Black Friday, for example. Like, okay, today we need 50,000 transactions a second, and today's the only day of the year, so we're going to pump up the power today, but it's not going to create
that's a good point.
For days and days and days that are too fast and cause all these other issues. So that's why the difficulty adjustment is about 2 weeks long, and why it was programmed that way. So if BSV is going to be used for money, there are going to be those spike days where the current adjustment is really, really unideal. So we need to get there eventually.
But it's a David and Goliath a moment, right? If you're still minority hash rate and and then you're like, okay, we're taking the training wheels off, you're going up against 90% hash rate. It's not like we got this settled, this is set in stone, this isn't going anywhere. You can definitely build your business on it, and all times it's not going to crash.
Well, that's the thing. It's not going to be a 90-10. If it's 90-10, nobody's going to flip that switch. Like that's the point, is that we got to be near 50-50, because what we're really talking about is eliminating replay protection rather, between BTC and BSV. So if we go to the same difficulty adjustment and we eliminate these barriers, and we're trying to absorb and orphan one another, that's really what it's going to be. It's going to be similar to how the networks are trying to orphan everybody else's blocks on the chain and be the one to build the next block.
Oh, see, I hadn't heard this. I hadn't heard anybody in BSV talk about the waiting to pull the trigger until there's price appreciation. That's interesting.
It has to be, not just price appreciation. Actually, the price is a little bit less relevant than the total hash power network.
Okay, fair enough.
Right.
Yeah.
So we got to be. It's got to be an iffy fight. Like, and at some point somebody's got to pull the trigger. So, and then at that point it will be screwy. Like it's pretty similar actually to kind of how BCH and BSV were for the first 2 weeks, when there was absolutely no replay protection and everybody was confused about what to do. I think that's going to be, I don't know, there'll probably be a name for that era at some point.
Exodus, I think, right? If we have Genesis and then Exodus.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah.
Steve, you seem to find that perspective interesting and said you haven't heard anybody in SB talk about that before. Does that observation assuage the concerns you have about there being this inconsistency given that fact?
Well, no, it doesn't fix the inconsistency. I mean, that would just be a wiser strategy before pulling the trigger. You have a reasonable chance of hitting the target.
Sure. So let me make sure I can accurately summarize the concern. The concern is, given the difficulty adjustment algorithm, given that change, BSV is misleading people by saying, hey, we got a lockdown protocol because there's a looming threat ahead, or at least a potential threat that isn't being talked about. And if that potential threat turns out to be real, well, then there goes your system. So that it's kind of a false promise to you. Yes.
And it's not like it's some trivial thing. You're talking about potentially system breaking changes, right? You're talking about, and now in my opinion, I do think it's a bigger risk for BTC than BSV. I think actually, if there is a price differentiation, having being the minority, being the lower valued coin might actually be an asset, right? Especially if you have like a passionate base in which you don't think that value is going to radically drop, versus if you have the majority hash rate and a bunch of people are speculators, they're more likely to sell, that price is more likely to dip, the hash rate's more likely to move in that other direction. But still, my point is, it's not like, okay, you can't use that transaction format anymore because we're moving to this other one. Well, it's a painful transition period. People get used to it. This is a big fight. This is a big, meaningful fight. And so there was two concerns. One is that it's misleading to pretend like there's not a potentially big system breaking change coming down the future. The other is that I haven't heard anybody explain what Kurt has just said, that the assumption is that there will be a larger accumulation of hash rate before they pull the trigger. I'm glad to hear that is, I think, correct strategic thinking.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing to consider is that, we've been looking at things, again, very long tail, like 2017, BCH and BTC fighting each other until there was the BSV split away, and now there's 3. And there's been this weird pseudo price war, but really none of these chains are actually doing real big business, right? Which is something that you've mentioned a couple of times. But if over the next 6 months, BSV has, let's say that EHR, the health data, and the seafood chain, and all these other things we see, it's like, if all of a sudden the average block size on BSV is 2-3 gigabytes a block, well, then all of a sudden these miners are looking at it and saying like, okay, I'm just losing money mining anything else but BSV. We could see a precipitous flip in that hash power.
That's valid. I mean, I hope that's the case. That's a very interesting, a clever way to steal away hash rate without price appreciation, is just make the blocks so big that you get transaction fees.
Correct. So in that situation, if all of a sudden, hey, we woke up this morning and BSV has 60% of SHA-256, well, flip the switch on the DAA, all of a sudden there's replay protection, or the replay protection has been broken between BTC and BSV, but BSV is exponentially more profitable to mine. Goodbye. We have orphaned you. Yeah. Nice knowing you.
I mean, so I like that story. I think that would be awesome. And I like that strategy as well. I hadn't really, because I'm so used to the connection between the price and the hash rate, that if you can actually manage to pay miners through just pushing big blocks, that's really good. I like that idea.
Yeah, I want to move us to the next topic. Steve, you expressed some concerns about Craig claiming to own the database. Can you articulate?
Yeah, I mean, so I've been concerned about Craig. So let me tell you actually my biggest concern about Craig, and then we can talk about the database thing. My biggest concern is that because a lot of people in BSV view him as Satoshi, that he has an undue influence over the technical development of BSV. So in my mind, I don't think we're in a position where if Craig calls Shatters into his office and they have a long discussion about some technical thing, I don't think Shatters is going to walk away saying, Craig is definitely wrong here, and I'm just not going to do that. I think, I might be wrong, I'd be very pleased to be wrong, I think Craig still has enough influence where he can persuade the people changing the stuff at the technical level, at the protocol level, to add features that might break the functionality of the network, or it might break it so that he can move Satoshi's coins, which I think is a plausible enough hypothesis. It might break in other ways that he doesn't even understand. I'll give you one example. So Roger Ver tells a story, which I've heard similar stories from other people, where they went to a conference with Craig, and somehow the topic of checksums came up. And the checksum is just at the end of a Bitcoin address. It's a particular formula of how the address is structured that that ensures the validity of the entire address. So like it's like a little tag to say this is a valid address, if you will. Now, there was some exchange that was had where Craig didn't seem to understand that at the end that what a checksum was in terms of BTC addresses, or Bitcoin addresses. I think it was BCH at the time. Now, I find that as very plausible because I have my own view of who Craig is. But I see that as if that's true, if there's that kind of error being made on the very, very concrete technical level, then it concerns me to think that this one individual has a huge amount of influence over technical development, because there might be little errors here and there that come up down the road that result from Craig not actually having as concrete technical understanding as he presents himself. So that's really the big objection that I have. Maybe Kurt, you can respond to that before we talk about the database thing.
Sure. It's, again, I'll give you plausible, like that. I understand that argument, but I think it overlooks I think it overlooks a lot of things, actually. First of all, like if we look at like how governance works, like, yes, it would be absurd to say that Craig is not influential, because he is indeed influential. In fact, I would argue he's influencing all kinds of other chains, even though everybody says that he's not. Doesn't matter. For some reason, he's topic of discussion in every other camp too. So it's an interesting bit of gravity that man has. But if you actually look at the way that nChain works, and this was something that if you didn't watch all of the conference, or if you weren't there, you kind of got a grasp of just how many people work at nChain, and sort of how they operate as a corporation. So the CEO is a very corporate CEO. So like Craig has a boss there. There's a board of directors. There's a technical, he's also a PhD who works directly with Craig, a guy named by the name of Owen Vaughn. Basically, he has a lot of similar accolades to Craig. He's, got the laundry list of, well, I've got this certification and this certification, and I'm a research scientist, et cetera, et cetera. And he's a younger dude. He looks like he's maybe 30, 35 years old, and he operates the entire research and development wing of nChain, which I was surprised to meet 5 or 6 of their engineers and realize like just the caliber of people that are working on a daily basis on the kind of thing that Craig will like, oh, Craig's giving a presentation on Thursday that we all have to be at. And it'll be Craig talking about true layer 2 and Metanet. And here's why this is what it was, and et cetera, et cetera. Here you go, a team of, 12 people or whatever. Start testing this. Get this on the test net in 60 days or whatever, And that was very much what I was led to believe is the consistent process at nChain. And the very interesting thing, and I wish I could name names because I met some very intriguing people who had no idea at all whatsoever that Craig was a controversial figure in technology. Like they were just like, I mean, I guess he's a little prickly. And it was like, do you know like the Satoshi drama or any? And they're just like, he goes to court, like he's out of the office. He goes to Miami. I'm just like, you really don't know. And they just nothing, no concept of like Peter McCormick or CoinDesk or any, like they're just like, I'm a computer science architect and that's my job. And I work primarily with Daniel or Steve or Owen, and Craig is kind of my boss's boss and whatever. But yeah, so I think there's like, first of all, there's a massive chain of command at nChain, but then there's also the mining people. I mean, you've got like Mempool and Norpool and even people like viability and stuff that are participating in big ways in a totally separate fashion. There's even Matterpool, which just opened up, which is sort of a conglomeration of the people from Twetch and a few other developers. Actually, Daniel Krawitz is involved. And, they're doing their own development path. Like we're going to have our own custom implementations. We're going to do all of our own custom stuff. We're going to be the biggest, baddest miner in 2 years. And we're going to make sure the damn protocol gets set in stone and done right, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot more at play than, Craig is going to drink too much and kick over a lantern and burn the city down,
Yeah, I think that is good. However, just from what I've seen, because I didn't have those conversations, I wasn't in London. I'm very skeptical of the idea that if Craig were to be set on some feature of a protocol upgrade, that he wouldn't have the kind of influence ultimately in the chain of command to get something pushed through. I mean, it might be true that the engineers working under him don't know that he's controversial. Okay, but ultimately, if they're getting a paycheck from the organization and the organization believes Craig is Satoshi, they're going to put a huge amount of weight on what Craig says, right?
But again, like Craig's not really in charge, though. Like the company is paying his paycheck. And there's a board of directors that are there to make money for their stockholders.
But if they believe that he's Satoshi, if on technical matters, of course they would be foolish not to defer to him, right?
But he's not the guy doing the granular work. Like Craig is not sitting at a workstation pumping out C++ code. So, which I don't think anybody assumes he is, but
I don't think so.
Now, let me ask you a question, Steve.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get you sued here.
The answer is no. I know nothing about it. It's my friends. No.
But do you think Calvin is afraid of Craig? Do you think Calvin is afraid to say no to Craig?
I have no idea. I couldn't comment. I don't know. I really don't know their dynamic between the two.
The reason I'm asking you this is because you clearly think, maybe I'm using too strong language, just make me more precise if I am, but you clearly seem to think that like Shatters, for instance, is afraid of Craig, right? You clearly seem to think that
I would not say afraid, not at all. I would say that Shatters in his heart is a believer. And I do think that Shatters deeply believes Craig is Satoshi and something happens with the mind where when you look up too much to somebody, you start convincing yourself that bad ideas are good ideas.
Okay,
I've seen it a million times. Yeah.
So I'm willing to concede that there's at least one person, right, in a position of influence who admires Craig so much that even if Craig says something wrong, at least one person will probably just like turn a blind eye out of like admiration and respect. My question for you though, and I thought Calvin would be a great candidate for this question. Do you think there are no people in a position of influence who would push past their admiration for him and say, I think what you're advocating for is going to break the system?
I think it definitely not no people. I mean, it's somewhere between all and none for sure. So I to return to your question, does Calvin fear Craig? If what you mean is, will Calvin believe nonsense if Craig says it in the right circumstance? Yes, I do think Calvin will believe nonsense if Craig says that. I mean, why would we have the expectation that Calvin Ayre is going to have deep technical knowledge of these things? But also to answer your question more specifically, because I think Calvin is in that position and others are in that position, and Calvin is this very influential dude, I think it could be, from what I see from the outside, it strikes me as eminently plausible that enough people high enough in the hierarchy would be persuaded by Craig as to allow some technical problems to be pushed through and propagated down the chain of command.
Yeah, so I swear that I'm not gonna try to take Kurt's place here because I'm not worthy of that role. But I need to frame up this objection to make sure I really got what you're saying here, because it seems like in order for your objection to work, it is necessarily the case that there be at least one possible scenario where Craig can advocate for something that can break the system, and people will look past the fact that it can break the system merely because of the admiration they have for Craig. And I want to know your response to Kurt breaking down all of the different ways that things are tested. So I mean, even if Craig did say, let's do this dangerous thing that breaks the system, it seems like Kurt just argued that when they go to do it and test it out, they will see that this can break the system. And you're saying that you don't think there's anybody in the organization that will be like, nah, we got to let Craig know that's going to break the system. We can't move further.
I think it's more complex than that. I mean, I think the Bitcoin system is more complex than that, where you can have some feature that's a bug that goes unknown for a long period of time that you can't necessarily iron out all the bugs in production. I also think it's the case that I could see that Craig has persuaded people for example, if to go back to the 0.1 software allows some weird ability to move coins without a valid signature, that everybody else in the crypto world might think, well, this is an obvious bug. Craig might be able to say, no, it's not a bug. This was in 0.1. And that argument I could see be persuasive enough where people are like, oh, well, I guess it was in 0.1. We're going back to the original protocol. Satoshi was the main guy creating it. And so we're going to allow this crummy feature to be out on the network. I could see that as well. But they don't even consider it a bug, but other people would be.
Well, then it's a much more philosophical conversation. I mean, we might as well be arguing about, whether or not unicorn farts smell pleasantly. It's like, come on now.
Not all philosophy is like. I mean, so you have seen some of the antics from Craig. right? So why is this not a valid concern that somebody who's very out there on a lot of things definitely has a lot of influence at an organization that's developing the protocol?
I think, setting aside Craig's personality, like I worked in PR for years and years and years. I don't like the way Craig presents himself from a PR standpoint. If I was the marketing director at Enchain, I would just have a heart attack. So, which is why I don't work in marketing at Enchain, probably. But the real issue is that it kind of doesn't matter what he has to say if his influence can only go so far. And also, we're assuming that the stuff that is unpleasant is also going to necessarily be technically wrong or unpleasant. Like you mentioned, some feature that's like, well, it was in the protocol, maybe it's a bad idea, maybe it grinds some people's gears, but maybe it is or isn't a good idea. In fact, we've seen this argument a ton. I've had so many BCH people over the last year and a half talking, this Metanet's not even this is insane. This is just, it's a meme. It's not, like, all of it's impossible. And, we're seeing more and more like, hey, look at this usable tool. Hey, we've completely eliminated anybody's perception of using a Bitcoin wallet while they're using our app and all these different things. So, we talk about like, well, that's going to break Bitcoin, or this somehow fundamentally undermines its use as cash, the fact that there are Metanet apps that operate on the same chain. And that stuff is opinion. So can we say that something is fundamentally good or bad? I don't know.
Here would be a good example is when Craig writes that article and says that it seems to imply that it's totally reasonable for miners to accept invalid blocks by making an invalid transaction because they change the output of the transaction. Now, somebody could reasonably say, I don't want that system. That seems like that's a fundamental break to the system. I could see other people say in the right context, that's okay. But I think it's valid criticism to point out that the system Craig is envisioning, and given his influence, that might not be ideal, or might be far from ideal.
I think it's a valid concern. I don't think that it's an invalid argument. And I think, what people are arguing about is they're talking about the edge case being the norm, and we can have these conversations. Like I'm very much a purist when it comes to like establish your presuppositions and what are the rules and what are the guidelines. And that's actually kind of where Craig's at too, with the law. And I think he's talking, what we would colloquially understand as municipal or federal law or international law in some cases. But he's also, I think, when I listen to him talk, I think he's talking a little more fundamentally about like natural law or like the law of gravity, like the kind of thing that can't break. And so to him, I think it's a little deeper than people are giving him credit for when they're strawmanning him also. But when we look at it and say, okay, can a federation of states put together subpoenas or put together, various types of court orders and enforcement to change the output of a transaction? I think when he's talking about, I don't know that he's even necessarily saying that should happen or that he desires for it to happen. I think he's merely saying, from what I've read, I think he's merely saying that it's foolish to assume that it can't happen or that it's somehow impossible because quote unquote decentralization or whatever.
Code is law or something.
Yeah.
Well, I would agree with some of that, except the claim that he doesn't think that it's desirable. I mean, if you listen to his rhetoric, he seems to get a thrill talking about breaking, throwing the lawbreakers in jail and going to the government, working with the government to try to imprison people and get the nasty drug dealers and the money launderers and that kind of thing. Right. Which I just personally, I don't particularly like, but I'm not saying that's a huge objection to BSV per se.
I understand. And I think, this is where you start to parse into the, like, what is an anarchist libertarian versus a Randian objectivist or whatever, and Craig is very much a libertarian. So I don't think Craig is looking to, eliminate beer and, that kind of thing. Like, so he's talking about these like international human smuggling, human trafficking, that kind of thing. And it's like, all right, is he trying to put his opposition in a position where they are defending human trafficking as a primary use case for Bitcoin? Like, that's what I actually think is going on. Like, he's taking the worst of the worst, and because he knows that the hard line ANCAPs are going to be like, no, man, human trafficking, like being able to do really despicable business is fundamental to Bitcoin. And he's forcing them into straw manning themselves, essentially.
Yeah.
As a debate tactic. That's kind of what I see with Craig, is that he's really good at creating rhetoric where people find themselves feeling like they're forced to disagreeing with him, and then basically admitting that they're like some of the worst people on earth.
Well, I mean, yeah. Well, one thing that I've noticed in BCH that was part of the reason I've become more pessimistic on it is that because people hate Craig so much, they would take the always anti-Craig position. So if Craig goes out and says, hey, the sky is blue today, they're going to go, no, it's not. You're an idiot if you think the sky is blue. So suddenly when Craig says reasonable and important things, specifically about maybe the economic functioning of the system, which I enjoy his commentary often when he's talking about, they go, no, that's wrong. No, that can't work. That's just BSV rhetoric, which is terrible because they totally concede a lot of the rational points to BSV. And I see so few people in BCH being like, no, that's actually just true. That used to be our philosophy as well. But this is a natural segue into another criticism that I have of the BSV culture, which is the focus on compliance rather than innovation. So just another example, I was trying to send around some BSV. I was looking for a very simple BSV wallet, and everyone that I got on the Play Store, it required me to punch in my personal information. Well, hey, what's your email? And what's your phone number? So we'll make sure and it's like, so I don't like that even from a strategic point as a barrier to entry. Like, that's a pain in the butt. There's various reasons why I don't want to give out my phone number, or it's more difficult for me to give out my phone number to get an app. I don't know. There might be a BSV app on your phone that allows you just to have the damn wallet, like a mycelium or something. I would like to see that, but it's not there. And I think part of the reason for that is because the culture is so compliance focused. And I don't think that's healthy. I don't think that's attractive. I much prefer the approach of like, look, when you have something as revolutionary as a Bitcoin, you can't conform what it is and what you can do with it to all of the existing rules and regulations. The rules and regulations need to conform to this new technology to push it in the right direction. And I think BCH gets that much better than BSV right now.
I disagree. So first of all, I think there are apps that you can just spin up.
Yeah,
I know you can.
There's got to be some.
I think I use Simply Cash is the.
I'm pretty sure I used that and it was the same story. I'll have to check later, but
you know what? It's been a long time since I've set up a new BSV wallet, so I can't confirm. But if I recall, Simply Cash did not require any of that information. But it's an interesting problem. So like, I very much came to Bitcoin as an ANCAP, as a revolutionary type. So for me, I was in that camp 100%. Like, oh, this is great. I can do business without anybody's permission and without anybody tracking me, etc. But I think, I mean, the real problem with that is it ignores the fact that Bitcoin is pretty fundamentally a surveillance network. Like, it's a public ledger of everybody's business. Now, whether or not that's good or bad is a completely separate conversation, but I think that's fundamentally what the product is. And if you want to do illegal business, even, let's say I'm a food truck and I accept some cash that doesn't get, I don't tell the IRS about, it's a very different crime than, cocaine or human trafficking. But Bitcoin's probably not the right tool for you if you're looking to be a money launderer ultimately.
But why not have the approach of both? So you have the public ledger, and then you have more privacy features, like you got the Schnorr signatures that allow in cash fusion and these types of things. Why not have both?
I'm not hard opposed to necessarily the concept of a shuffle or having, I would not do it on the main protocol. Like, I would not have the main Bitcoins be able to do that. However, some kind of tokenized asset on top of it that is a little bit less traceable for various reasons, that would be something I'd be willing to discuss. But I think when you take the protocol and you're mixing coins, you have to think about who you're mixing coins with and what that actually puts in your wheelhouse. It's the same thing. If I have $10,000 and I run a hot dog stand, I don't want to be going to a mob run casino to launder my money out, because I'm associating with people that could get me in a whole heck of a lot more trouble than $10,000 earned off the books at a hot dog stand. So
yeah, but what if it's the case that the expectation is that there is a shuffling process at the base layer? So it's not there's no taboo of your money being mixed with some bad person, because that's the expectation of what happens at the protocol level.
Well, then it makes it that businesses won't then it only becomes that. Then we're stuck in that Monero pirate radio situation, in my opinion. I think
I don't see why that's the case, though. I mean, there was an interview with Elon Musk recently where he kind of talked about this point. He was saying that money has to be both legal, and you got to have a little bit of the illegality as well. It's got to make a good currency, just like from an economic standpoint. It is a merit to be able to use it for a little bit of wash trading, a little bit of dark net stuff. Like, I agree with that. I think that's true. And I the idea that, everything needs to be perfectly tracked and maintained, I don't think that's necessary from a money standpoint. Maybe that's how the system was designed. That might be true, but it doesn't mean that's the best design.
I don't want to sound heartless, but I kind of don't care about the victims on that end. Because you got to think about it from a law enforcement standpoint, or from not even law. Like, let's say that there's a public blockchain that we're all using. Are the police going to go after people that are maybe, dealing a little bit of pot, or again, avoiding a little bit of taxation or that kind of thing? Like, no. And they already don't do that today. Because
it's hard, though. Maybe if it was a lot easier, they would.
It's still a volume game. Like, they're still going to go after the same kind of people that you and I would agree. Like, I don't want the rapists on the street. I don't want the violent criminals. I don't want the people that are violating my sovereignty or my neighbor's sovereignty. Like, those are the things that anybody's going to go after. So
you don't want your money to be, you don't want to go to the bank and withdraw the $10 bill if the rapist has also used that $10 bill.
Well, here's the thing. I don't care about that, because if I can prove that I got that $10 bill from something that was completely disconnected from the rapist, then that's the value of the public ledger. So, like, this is actually a fungibility conversation, right?
Yeah.
And there's two ways to look at fungibility. Either all money is completely anonymous, or all money is completely public. Like, those are really our options. Because
why not the middle option?
Because if it's in the middle, then there's this huge what if. Then if I'm caught trying to buy pizza with coins that 2 transactions ago were used to sell children into slavery, then but if, let's say Pizza Hut has that sort of monitoring on their software, on their merchant system, then I get flagged as the guy that tried to use pedophile coins to buy pizza. And then I'm flagged, and I don't have a way to prove. I mean, I used a mixer. And
Steve, before you object, let me clarify here, because I think I understand Kurt's position. When Kurt says it's either all money is completely anonymous or completely public, by advocating the completely public position, he's not saying something that will be inconsistent with the pseudonymous system that Bitcoin SV is. He's saying public in principle, meaning that even though you can have privacy for day-to-day usage, that in principle, if law enforcement were willing to invest the significant time and energy and money necessary to track it, they could. Is that right, Kurt?
Absolutely. Like, again,
you don't mean every transaction is completely transparent to everybody.
Well, if we're talking about me being able to go buy Pizza Hut and BSV, then we're talking about 10 terabyte blocks every 10 minutes, which means we're also talking about a cost problem where if they're investigating me for laundering a few $100,000 a week, that might be worth them to pay a miner to track all my UTXOs. However, if I'm that guy that's maybe slipping $50 under the table, or, even hundreds, but I'm essentially a harmless person, it's just not worth anybody's police time.
And also, if I don't want my neighbor to know that I'm buying the pizza, that's it. That's easy. How's he ever going to find out? Like, it's this cost
of pursuing. If somebody is evil or they're a major danger, then it's worth pursuing because there's a cost to pursue it. But again, everybody's going to cheat a little bit, like we're all going to use cash on a daily basis. So again, if we're talking about these 10 terabyte blocks every 10 minutes or whatever it ends up being for worldwide use, you've got this problem where it's already more private than something like Zcash or Monero or whatever, because it's just so ungodly infeasible to crack that if you're willing to spend a few $100,000 to track a BSV transaction, it's actually quite a bit easier to do on Monero right now. It doesn't take that much hash power to take over and decrypt Monero. Like it's just a hash function. You can brute force Monero if you have enough power. So it's the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree that having huge blocks can can result in increased privacy. My point is to say that I don't think it has to be an either or. If you have mixing, coin mixing, you can still break coin mixing. I mean, if you have enough analysis power, as people have done, you can get the whole set of all the coins that have been mixed as well, which is just really more expensive. But I'm okay with that.
So then it's worthless. Then we're talking about the same thing.
Well, no, what I'm saying is, I think it would be a lot more expensive for law enforcement to do blockchain analysis when you have something like privacy features at a lower level. So you have the Schnorr signatures on BCH that allows apparently for increased privacy. I like that. I like the idea of costs being really, really high to do blockchain analysis. Doesn't mean it's impossible, but it's really high. I prefer that versus a world in which if you don't have any coin mixing, it's still possible. If you have somebody's targeting you for some reason, they can release their analysis of the UTXO set on the darknet, and then it's trivially easy for people to track all of your public finances. So I think the harder you make it to do that kind of analysis, the better, in my opinion.
I mean, I don't disagree. I think I'm disagreeing with the how rather than the if. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that me and you should be able to just sit and audit each other all day if we're just stalkers, right? Like it should not be something that is simple for me to accomplish. It should be difficult. And it should also be a little bit difficult for the police or for whatever else. Like that I have to actually be a high value target for me to look to brute force my history. So I think on that point we agree, but we may be disagreeing on how that's implemented. Like I don't like Schnorr signatures for completely different reasons.
What is that? I'm curious.
it breaks malleability. Like it again breaks a number of scripting functions. Like
So when you say it breaks malleability, you're saying malleability as a benefit of script.
Correct. I think malleable transactions are a good thing. Like
Can you
it
explain
allows
that?
it allows a script function. So if you build a program in script, a malleable transaction can be used to toss a transaction back and forth for sort of an analogy. So sort of think maybe two mempools. Like, do we want a transaction to be immediately settled, or do we want it to sit in the mempool? And in some situations you do, in some situations you don't. So if the script is telling the transaction, hey, maybe don't settle right away because we want to run a program with this UTXO doing, or not UTXO, with the unverified transaction, or maybe we want to play with it a little bit before it settles, then we want to be able to do that. A Schnorr signature doesn't allow that because it's aggregating the signatures. So I'm connected to you even if I don't want to be. And that makes it that I would have to build a completely different scripting language to be able to treat it the same way.
That's interesting. That's very abstract. Would there be any concrete examples that you have of what that might enable, the malleability examples?
There's not a great one that exists right now, but I would say actually payment channels is a plausible one. So high functioning payment channels, or maybe even streaming video or streaming audio. So something that exists in the mempool, but is not necessarily like how do you do that? Well, you can push data that is audio live to the mempool in theory, but the tools don't exist yet. And they don't exist yet because they haven't been built yet. but it's a theoretical use case where you would want the malleability of the transaction to allow such a thing.
Okay. Okay, I don't want to go too far down this rabbit hole. I'm putting you really on the spot. This is not an easy question, but
it's actually,
yeah.
it's a lot of theoretical stuff. Like
Yeah.
I'm talking about tools upon tools that don't exist right now. So
okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
So we can just leave it there.
Yeah,
Well,
you
so
have to get him on Patterson in Pursuit and do a Schnorr signature episode. Just an hour of geeking out on that. You seem like you were getting ready to say something. I was going to move us to another topic that you mentioned, but I'm going to give you.
No, go for it.
Okay. When we talked about arguments against BSV concerns, I know you've expressed a few already. I want to make sure we get a couple of more in. One of them you mentioned was what you deem to be the Roger Ver problem, where, if I understand correctly, it's that Roger Ver is on BCH and the people in the BSV community are really hard on him, calling him a criminal and saying negative things about him every chance they could get. And you believe this is a problem. Is that inaccurate?
That would be a way to put it. Yeah, I do think that's a problem. And it's not just because I like Roger. I mean, I think in principle, you got probably the oldest and most successful Bitcoin entrepreneur in existence, who is a big blocker and super sympathetic. I mean, BSV and BCH were the same community not that long ago. And then you got a bunch of hostile BSV people that are attacking him and fantasizing about throwing him in jail. I think that's stupid. I think that's very bad strategy. It would be amazing it would be game over. If Roger Ver came over to BSV, in my opinion, game over. BSV is going through the roof. There's no competition.
Why do you think he's different than, say, someone else who's like really popular in the crypto space? Like, let's just take CZ, right? Because Craig's always getting on him, right?
Yeah.
If someone like him embraced BSV, lots of people would be like, oh, wow.
Sure.
Really? Yeah. So
sure.
What makes Roger so different?
Well, I mean, just his history. I mean, the dude is legendary in the space. He commands a huge amount of influence. CZ does too, but I don't think it's in the same ballpark as Roger. I mean, you don't.
Why would it be game over? What would Roger do if he joined?
Well, who else is on BCH? That's why it would be game over. Because big block Bitcoin is going to win, in my opinion. It's still the best coin. I see nothing better. And probably the main reason that I think BCH has any shot whatsoever is because Roger and Bitcoin.com. So if he goes to BSV, there's no other competition. That's what I would say. But going back to the broader point, it is a problem I see in the BSV community, this hostility towards Roger as a person, and then Roger in the abstract, meaning the businessman who maybe is not a hardcore statist and like wants to build platforms that are maybe in more of a legal gray area, but they're innovative. I think if you have a culture that's super hostile to that, that's very foolish, and that's not good at all.
Two things. I think you may be overestimating Roger's value a little bit, and not hugely. I don't think it's an absurd statement, but I think the Roger of 2020 is quite a bit less important than the Roger of, say, 2017 or 2018. And the other thing is, I don't think there's a particular hostile. Like, I consider myself something of a significant voice in the BSV community, and I don't have anything necessarily negative to say about Roger. Like, I do see it a little bit from Twitter trolls, but
from Craig.
But Craig is Craig, right?
Yeah, Craig is Craig, but he did the most prominent dude in BSV, right?
Sure. Okay. So to that point, like, I also want to say that I think there are a lot of things that Roger has been foolish about, both in Bitcoin and out. I think he, from let's just leave it in Bitcoin. Like, when we look at the way that the hash war went down, first of all, I think Roger fully believes that Craig is Satoshi, and I don't think he cares. I think Roger puts his ideology ahead of everything else, which in some ways is respectable. It would be more respectable if I had more respect for his ideology, but I think he's treating his ideology as more important than his business, and he's putting his ideology as more important than people. And one example of that is we saw how he behaved during the hash war, and what appears to have happened. The thing that he's being sued for and everything else is that he took customers' hash power. So people paid Roger and said, "Roger, mine me the most profitable thing." And Roger seemingly unilaterally moved hash power to a place that was less profitable and tanked the market for pretty much everybody, but specifically wasted his customers' money on his own ego, on the thing that he believes. So he put his ideology in front of his customers in that situation. And I look at that and I say, okay, that's a bad business decision. So if he was just some faceless CEO, I would say, okay, bad idea. But Roger is also a very public person. He's Bitcoin Jesus, which I know is not a title he gave himself, but it's nonetheless, he's the prophet of BCH. So when he does that, it very much, it goes back to this culture of, you know what, I'm this principled ANCAP libertarian type, and all these things matter, and human sovereignty, et cetera, except I really want to win this competition against people I don't like, and I'm going to screw all these people that I have business contracts with, and that's okay. So I see that as like, okay, so Roger is hardline with his ideology until he gets really put against, that's one of those moments where it's like,
do you know the details of the contracts he engaged with? I mean, that seems like a pretty high claim to say that he's breaking his legal business contracts to fight a personal contest.
Well, I did read the lawsuit, the class action suit. That's what he's being sued for. So that is what is alleged. I don't know it to be absolutely true, but if you look at the way that the hash power swung during the split, I think it's, I don't know what else could have happened, frankly. So
no, I'm saying I'm not disagreeing that he had influence over a huge amount of hash rate. I'm saying the details of the contracts that he engaged with his customers. I mean, if the contract is, hey, I'm going to, like the way that you phrased it is, put my hash rate towards the most profitable coin, I can definitely see something in the not a stretch of the imagination to say, okay, well, the most profitable coin is going to be Bitcoin ABC. This other one, because he has positive beliefs about maybe there's fraud taking place, the individual is not professional on the other chain, that he's thinking he's protecting his customers' assets by moving them to ABC.
Maybe I should add a little more clarification. At the time, Bitcoin.com was mining BTC and BCH. I believe that's still all they are mining. I don't think they mine any BSV. If they do it in secret. So the contract was either mine only BCH, mine only BTC, or flip the switch to whatever's most profitable. You have those three options as a customer of Bitcoin.com's mining pool. So if I had an ASIC, I could make a contract with Roger and say, Roger, make me the most money, or mine only BTC, or mine only BCH. At the time, what we were all under the assumption of is that we are mining to fight for the BCH ticker. One side will thrive and the other side will be orphaned and reorganized into the other. What Roger seems to have been very much in cahoots with is the closed source checkpointed software that nobody knew about until after the split had occurred, and on the night that it occurred. But he also unilaterally or directed his head of mining, who has since quit the company, by the way, to do exactly that, to be like, you know what? We're not mining whatever's the most profitable. We're going to get into this unprofitable fight with our client's hash power because we can, and we're going to force the split and go our own ways, which also was not what was being negotiated. That was not what the hash war was supposed to be. It was not supposed to be a split. It was Nakamoto consensus where one side lives and one side dies. And it was an underhanded move. It just plainly...
I don't think we're in a position to claim with any kind of confidence the details of the contracts that these people are engaged with and whether or not it's a breach of contract, just because that's what Craig Wright alleges in a lawsuit. I mean, what we've seen from these lawsuits, like he's suing Peter McCormack for libel. Come on. I mean, I don't think that he's committed libel at all, just because just because Craig Wright claims that in a lawsuit.
I would agree. It's, again, it's alleged, right? So first of all, the class action suit, as far as I can tell, and I don't have any inside information, I don't know. It appears to be a class that is not related to Craig. It's not related to CoinGeek. From everything that I've seen, I could be wrong, but the class that is suing is based on a law firm that has sued various cryptocurrency projects for various things over the years. Representing such interest. I don't see a connection directly to Craig. However, Craig's criticism of Roger, I do think is valid. I think Roger violated his business contract. And I mean, you can go to the bitcoin.com mining pool right now and see what it would take to sign up for a mining contract. It's very simple. There's a little bit of legalese. You accept terms and conditions, et cetera, et cetera. Roger, make me money.
Kurt, let me play devil's advocate here.
Yeah.
Suppose we were to say, all right, let's just concede all of that. Roger did this bad thing in the past. Roger man bad, right? So suppose we concede that. Wouldn't Steve's argument still stand that, all right, fine, man, nobody's perfect, but this guy still has a ton of influence. And if he came over to BSV, it would simultaneously bury BCH and take BSV to the next level. Do you concede that, or what's your response to that in particular?
I think there's some value to Roger. Like I've said as much to him on Twitter. Like I've said exactly that. Like, Roger, you're Bitcoin.com. You sell BTC products, even though you claim BTC is no good. You fundamentally disagree with the BTC roadmap. So why not BSV? So I've had those conversations just publicly, just on Twitter. I don't have Roger's cell phone number or anything like that. But yeah, I think that there's some value to Roger. I do think it's overstated. I don't know that Roger is some linchpin that's holding up the entire BCH economy. I do think he's significant. He's arguably the most significant player, but I don't think he's holding up an entire house of cards.
In BCH, you think there are, I mean, who else in BCH is promising or relevant?
What's the thing? I mean, it's like saying the same thing about BTC or Dash or anybody else. It's like, there are significant people. Like, there are people whose voices matter, but I don't know that BCH would necessarily flip price or anything like that just because of like it would be really good for headlines. I think there would be a significant move. I think there would be a shakeup. I don't know if it would be that's it, we got Roger, game over.
Yeah,
I don't think it would be like election night and and then everybody pops the champagne.
I think between BSV and BCH it would be. I mean, I among relevant players, I have just a little bit of knowledge of the stuff that's happening more behind the scenes and the development that's happening, like real, true business development. Mm-hmm. And from my understanding, it's essentially all in that circle of the Bitcoin.com.
Sure.
Roger Ver. So it didn't used to be the case, but now that's the case. So if he left, I would think there'd be no compelling activity in BCH that would make me think that it's a project that's going to succeed.
Sure.
All right, I got a couple of questions for you guys before we run out of time here. Kurt, my question for you. What's one thing that could happen? Well, actually, let me back up for a second, because I believe something that's very important philosophically when we talk about the things that we believe is our ability to say what we would accept as valid evidence against what we believe. I think if you can't answer the question, what it would take to undermine your belief, it's hard to make a case for your intellectual honesty, right? So I want to do this with both of you. So for you, Kurt, what's one thing that could happen, or one thing that you could see that could actually undermine your faith in or support of BSV?
I mean, network failure, clearly. Like, I would like to see more rigorous stress testing. I think the thing right now is that, given that we have no block size limit, we're actually not sure what the emergent block size limit is. I don't know if 10 terabyte blocks are, I would say they probably are impossible right now with current implementations. But I don't know. Is it 1 gigabyte? Is it 5 gigabytes? Is it less? Maybe it's 750 something megabyte. Like, we don't know. If we were to go through a couple rounds of, all right, let's push a bunch of microtransactions or whatever, let's see what happens, and it just, total lockup of the network, or forced hard fork, some weird rollback, whatever, that would be a game changer for me. That would be like, okay, maybe we were wrong. But it would be.
Sorry. One follow-up. Yeah. Do you think another possibility we didn't get to was if Craig falls into legal trouble? It seems like, I don't follow these court cases particularly closely, but it seems like some courts aren't very impressed with some shenanigans that's going on. So theoretically, I have no idea if he will, but if he did end up in trouble with the law, do you feel like that would be a big problem at this point?
I don't. I actually think Craig has lost quite a bit of underlying significance to the success of BSV. Definitely when it was new, it would have been a big problem, or, you know, $50 per coin, that kind of situation. But, you know, I remember before the split, Craig even said, like, what I really truly want is for you to compete with me. And he went on to say that I desire to become insignificant to the network. So I think he was admitting, like, I understand this is going to be too centralized from the get-go, but that the locked protocol and all these other things that matter make me less and less significant as an individual as time goes on. And I think we're pretty clearly seeing that. So I don't think it would be a death blow by any means to BSV. It certainly would be to his ego. But
one, I got to turn the light on. I can see I'm getting too dark here.
No problem.
Hey, Steve, I have a version of this question for you. You've expressed on many occasions concern with varying degrees of emphasis about things that Craig might do or could do that would be really bad. One of the things we talked about was, you know, what used to be a prediction before Genesis, which now you still say it's not a prediction, but it's at least a possibility. My question for you is, what could Craig and BSV possibly do that would make those like theoretical possibilities no longer worth appealing to? Like, what could happen that would make you say, you know what? I've had concerns about this guy for a long time. Maybe those concerns aren't just going to come true. And like, this is actually happening. What could convince you of that?
So I think more of what is currently happening, which is real businesses being built on it. I don't think we're outside of the window in which Craig can really screw up the network, but we're trending that direction. And especially after this CoinGeek conference, that seemed to be the case. So the more businesses are built on it, the bigger the network, the bigger the industry, the more I'm not really going to care about the antics. In terms of him personally, I would love to see, I mean, it'll never happen, but I would love to see like, haha, I was just kidding about a lot of this stuff. Yeah, I was actually Satoshi, and here's some evidence of that, but the additional drama, that was all clever marketing. And like, yeah, there was a bunch of other people involved with the project that had more technical knowledge. I was one piece of the puzzle. If there was a compelling story in which he did not pretend to, did not overstate his position in the development of Bitcoin, which I think he currently does, I think that would be a good sign. I mean, part of me, I don't think I'm alone in this. It seems like there's some game being played. Like there's some meta game between Craig and Calvin. They have some knowledge that we don't. I would really like to see what that knowledge is so we can get out of this weird stage where I think he has an undue influence over the future of the network.
Yeah. Kurt, do you have any sense of getting any closure on those types of things for somebody on the outside looking at BSV saying, all right, I'm thinking about developing, I'm thinking about supporting, but I kind of want to see how some of this crazy stuff that Steve just talked about unfolds. Do you think they can look forward to like a 2021 where those kinds of questions are answered?
I mean, I would like to see some vindication of some of this stuff. Absolutely. I'm a big student of history. I like a big caper. It'd be awesome for Craig to be like, bunch of coins, like I'm going to move some coins in 10 minutes. And then, they just start, it'd be like, wow, it'd be the kind of thing to give me, goosebumps a little bit. Like, oh man, he really kept that poker face that strong for all of that. Huh? So like, that'd be very cool. I don't know. It's such an interesting thing though. It's like, do you ever want to meet your heroes or how do you feel 20 minutes after the Super Bowl ended? That kind of thing. It's like, all right, now what? So I don't know what the cultural change would even be. So it's interesting. One of the points you brought up, like, is Craig overstating his role in the creation of Bitcoin? And I think it's possible he is a little bit, but if you actually read a lot of what he's written, he gives a lot of credit to, first of all, Dave, which he brings up all the time, Dave Kleiman, but he also brings up Dave Reese quite a bit, and I forget his name, Ray Dillinger as well, and then Hal Finney. He gives plenty of due credit to Hal as well, and says, like, yeah, you know, Dave and Hal did a lot of debugging together, and Dave helped me implement whatever. Dave helped me with this paragraph of the white paper. Like, so it's not like there's none of that. Like, Craig is not saying like, they all worked for me for a couple of weeks.
Well, he references himself as Satoshi. I think that's a bit preposterous. I think it's probably a team. And if he was involved in that team, I strongly suspect that he was not playing the dominant role in terms of the coding or the conceptual breakthroughs, that type of thing. I
distinctly recall him saying that he was Satoshi in the sense that it was his idea. Like he wrote a series. This is about a year ago.
What does that mean, though? I mean, but think of if that is such a cop out, though. Like, oh, it was my idea. The idea, which idea exactly? Like, oh, did decentralized digital cash? I was working on this for 20 years. Okay, but all right, to claim that you're Satoshi seems to mean something specific.
I'm gonna go ahead, TK. I see you want to say something.
Well, I was just gonna say, in fairness, debates about who should have the credit for being the main creator are fairly typical and really hard to kind of flesh out, because there really are circumstances where you have people, let's say you have an individual who like totally came up with the idea. And let's say there's another individual that maybe they hired or they reached out to. Okay, so it happens in Hollywood, for instance, right? I got a storyline, I got a plot. I can tell you how I want the whole story to be from beginning to end. I hire a writer. I say, this is my story. And I tell them, there's no way they can execute this without me. Then they go and they flesh out the details. I critique their work and say, change this, change that. They finish the details. And guess what? At the end of that process, we've got a straight up debate about who the real creator is. And I feel inside my heart and mind that I am the creator, and that other person feels like, no, I am. Those kinds of disputes are real and they happen a lot. So it's quite possible that Craig could really be the architect. He could feel that he is, believe that he is, look at the other people as people that he enlisted for help. And at the same time, an outsider look at that process and go, well, I don't like that because he's not technically proficient enough to have executed this aspect of building the system.
Well, and that's what I wanted to say about it is, you know, if you look at Notre Dame Cathedral, right? Like, who built it? Was it the architect or was it the bricklayer? And then the damn answer is it was both of them, right? So I'm going to break my rule. That my rule is never bring up Steve Jobs and never bring up Adolf Hitler. But I'm going to bring up Steve Jobs.
Oh,
here.
Bring up them both. That would be great.
let's work them both into it. Did Hitler ever kill anybody? Come on. So all right, let's not put that as the sound clip.
The title of the debate.
15-second highlight.
Now I've done it. All right. Steve Jobs never wrote a line of code. Steve Wozniak did all of it in the early days. The first few years, Steve Wozniak did 100% of the coding. Steve Jobs did not know how to code at all. He was simply the visionary. Steve Jobs, actually, his greatest contribution is he was really, really into typography. So he wanted beautiful fonts on the Apple computer. And that was his big thing. Like, I want the Apple interface to look beautiful, like the New York Times or the Atlantic or whatever, you know? So, you know, and then you look at it and it's like, okay, who is history going to remember as the man who made Apple great? Well, it's going to be Steve Jobs, even though his contribution was literally a bad attitude and an affinity for good fonts and and various other aesthetics, you know, not to minimize it, but Steve Wozniak was the guy that was banging out tens of thousands of lines of code and building the first Apple operating systems and all of these different things, the firmware, the hardware, all of this stuff. Was the guy sweaty making it happen, and Steve was the guy at the trade show pitching his religion, which was Apple computers.
Right.
And I think it's very much the same way. But to Craig's credit, again, I should look them up and send them to you guys, because he wrote a series of articles about a year ago was like a 3-part series. It's where he mentioned that he was fighting human traffickers in South America and he got shot, and everybody was criticizing like just
I
how.
didn't hear this one.
No, they're over the. I read them myself and said, "Oh, why? Why does it have to be this?" But what he said in it is he gave an immense amount of credit to, first of all, buying a lot of intellectual property from David Rees, who is a much older cryptographer. He was in his 70s or 80s 10 years ago. And he said, like, Satoshi is a character. I created Satoshi. Satoshi became a sort of business partnership between me and Dave. And then Dave and I worked with Hal, Ray Dillinger, using stuff that we bought from David Rees, and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The last line of the article was, I'm not Satoshi, I was Satoshi. And part of what he brought up about it is that Satoshi was a character that he created, if I recall, decades earlier, that he had used the moniker for years and years. It was his hacker pen name, essentially. And, again, this stuff is unverified. Like, this is still Craig speak. But at the same time, like, he published this information as, this is what I mean when I say I am Satoshi. Like, I'm talking about all these different things. Granted, it's asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. Right. But
yeah, I mean, he plays super fast and loose with that, right? When Calvin talks about, well, yeah, Craig is Satoshi, and other people talk about Craig is Satoshi, they don't mean the asterisks, and Craig knows that, right?
But
yeah.
How, it's like when you talk about a secret, like how is a secret going to stay secret between 3 guys? And it's, well, if 2 of them are dead. And fortunately, in Craig's case, Dave Kleiman and Hal Finney are dead. So he has that opportunity to be like, well, I'm the last surviving member that did anything. So that's it. I get to be that guy. So whether it's fair or not, is debatable, but I don't think it's unreasonable at the same time.
One thing I'll say about this topic is this, and this is what I find interesting. When we say Craig is Satoshi, we could mean 3 things by that. I see 3 possibilities. Proposition 1 would be Craig and only Craig is the sole inventor of Bitcoin. Proposition 2 could be Craig is the main part of a team. And maybe the weakest version of this would be proposition 3, where we say Craig was involved in the process of creating Bitcoin as part of Team Satoshi, but maybe was more the sidekick than the hero. Maybe he was more like Scottie Pippen than Michael Jordan in the process, right? Now, even if that's true, if that turns out to be true, that will be about 10 times more than anything anyone in crypto is conceding. Because there's no one in crypto mocking Craig Wright for being a minor part of Satoshi.
Right.
Like that's not the joke at all, right? Like you're being extremely gracious and pro Craig by saying he was just probably this minor part. Nobody's giving him that grace. Like that will be enough to prove almost the entire crypto community embarrassingly wrong.
Well, and it's actually funny because what we do actually know is that he was mining blocks in year 1 as Craig Wright. So like that's not a disputed piece of information. Like that information is known. He was filing on his taxes in 2009. So
right, he says he was, right.
I believe his taxes are public because they're part of a
I hadn't seen this. I would love to see that he actually claimed it on his taxes and it's in the public. That seems like that would be important information.
I'm fairly certain that is just plainly public.
We got to find that out.
I'm not. I won't plant a flag on it, but yeah.
Yeah. Can you send it to us? There's something that Connor sent. Oh man, and I haven't read it. Now I regret not having read it. But maybe that could be it. I'm not sure. But if you find it,
well, that's if I recall. So I remember that I figured out who Craig was when Gizmodo and Wired published their stories about him. This was when everybody found out who Craig Wright was, and that's the only thing that triggered the audit in the first place was the fact that he put a valuation on his Bitcoins in Aussie dollars that they deemed inappropriate. So I don't think he would have even had any of the tax problems at all if it wasn't for the fact that he had filed those taxes. So
I don't know. I really want to see this. This would be great.
It's been a long time since I've gone back and it may be just plainly in the Gizmodo article, but I will double check.
Yeah, double check and maybe we can share it to those who are listening. Yeah. But we are at time. I promised that we would wrap at 8:30. So I appreciate you guys both showing up to have this discussion, doing it in a civil way. And Kurt, I appreciate you transcending the stereotype that people have of BSV supporters by not just saying, read the white paper.
Sure. I'm just glad to be here. I've had a good time.
Yeah, this has been great. And also thank you, Kurt, for being in a difficult position. Whenever I give talks about almost anything, I usually feel like I'm the guy I'm on the defensive trying to explain to people some unorthodox ideas. So it's interesting and nice to be sitting back and be like, here's a bunch of criticism, you handle it.
Yeah,
glad to participate. It's been fun.
All right, cheers, guys.